Hello everyone, bringing the Mannequin of the Month today for December 2020, and the topic we're covering in this video, as usual, picked by poll over on Patreon. Obviously, subscribers over there to the corporal tier get the chance to vote on what we're going to look at each month. And the topic chosen for this month is a British infantryman on exercise during the middle to late 1930s. And certainly what we're looking at here is based on photographs from around 1936, 1937. A lot of change was about to come to the British Army. The uniform and equipment as we have it here looks very similar to that worn and used during the Great War. Obviously we do have a more up-to-date respirator and haversack on the chest here, but otherwise a lot of the other sort of general aspects of this uniform and equipment would be very recognisable to a soldier of the latter part of the Great War. But a lot of change was about to be wrought because the British Army was introducing two new weapons, the Boy's anti-tank rifle and the Brennan light machine gun, both of which use box magazines, and you need a method of carrying these for the infantryman at large. Obviously the Lewis machine gun, which had gone before, there were specific pouches, specific methods of carrying the magazines for that, and it was decided that for the Boys and the Bren it would be necessary to have a new set of web equipment which was compatible with these, and obviously it was updated in various other features as well. That wasn't on the scene, of course, at this point. We still have the 1908 pattern web equipment. We're prematurely into the main part of the video talking about the Mannequin itself now, so I'll sort of reset and we'll start at the top as we normally do and then work our way down and talk about the rest of the features on the Mannequin here. Headgear consists of the Mark I steel helmet, still at this time. The Mark II had not arrived on the scene quite yet, and it was really an update of this anyway. A lot of shells were refurbished to Mark II specification. So Mark I steel helmet there, not that visually distinct from the Mark II, which would come a little bit later on. The uniform, of course, is service dress. This had been altered during the 1920s with a more tailored cut, less voluminous when compared to Great War service dress, which really was intended for use in the field and wasn't really intended as a smart uniform. Post First World War, service dress had been smartened up a bit and the cut had been improved from that point of view. We have an additional hook and eye added to the collar here, which is quite common to see in the 1930s, again to smarten it up a bit. So rather than the collar hanging loose, it's been hooked together at the front there. Dominating the front here we have a Mark V respirator haversack. This is similar in concept to the small box respirator and its haversack, with the canister, a hose and then a face piece. So obviously you have to wear the respirator haversack up on the chest so that you can pull the face piece out and put it on with the hose, leading to the canister which is left in the haversack. So when carried at the alert, it's up on the chest like this. So visually very similar to the small box respirator in that regard in terms of where it's carried, but an updated and upgraded design with a proper rubber face piece and so forth. Quite an advance in terms of the gas protection there, although still it has to be carried in this manner here, which is a bit clumsy. The web equipment is the 1908 pattern. From sort of the front we can see here, there's not a lot to differentiate this, but as we move it round, as we move the Mannequin round, we'll see there are quite a lot of changes, small detail differences and some parts omitted as well from what you typically see towards the end of the Great War. We'll talk about that more as we move it round. What we can see at the front here are the two cartridge carriers, see of kind of the final pattern, I guess you could say, with obviously the straps to stop you losing ammunition from the left-hand pouch there if leaning up against a parapet. That was something discovered very early during the Great War and modified accordingly. And then the belt at the waist here, and you can see a feature which is quite common to see in photographs from the 1930s. The end of the belt, rather than just being left loose, has actually been rolled back on itself through the buckle, and this just keeps the loose end of the belt tucked out of the way. And as I say, it's occasionally seen during the Great War as well, different methods of doing this, but certainly in the 1930s I've seen several photographs of this being done, so it's a feature I've replicated here. So that's the front of the Mannequin. We'll move this around now and have a look at the left-hand side. Looking at the left-hand side of the Mannequin here, we can see the bulk of the respirator haversack on the chest. Obviously quite a clumsy place to carry it, but with the canister and the hose assembly leading to the face piece, it's still necessary to carry it there in order to wear the face piece effectively. The 1908 web equipment, if we lift this out of the way, we can see the cartridge carriers here. We can better see the straps on the cartridge carriers down below, the pockets down below, obviously to stop you losing ammunition. These carry 10 rounds each, so there's 2 charges in each pocket for 100 rounds in total. This is based on photographs at the time, which actually often show even less carried, maybe one charger in each pocket, and sometimes the cartridge carriers carried empty. Photographs of men on exercise, depending on exactly what they're doing and what training they're engaged in. So went with 2 charges in each pocket in this instance, just for what we're using on the Mannequin here. It fills them out nicely. The bayonet, of course, the rifle of course still being the rifle number 1 Mark III Star. So we have the bayonet for that here, the 1907 sword bayonet at the back there carried in its frog behind the haversack. So this isn't worn in battle order per se. We have the haversack down on the hip. Again, very common to see in photographs from training in the 1930s. You have the haversack down on the hip with the pack having presumably been dumped and left in unit transport. You've then got just the haversack left on the side. So the equipment is sort of left from when it's been worn in full marching order with the pack on the back, and rather than moving the haversack onto the back, it's just been left on the brace ends there, as you can see. Looking at the back of the Mannequin here with the pack removed and nothing carried on the back, we can see some interesting features. You can see the buckles up on the braces here, which are of course for when the pack is attached, it simply buckles onto the straps, and then you have the lower straps on the cartridge carriers here, if I can pull this up, which are attached to the bottom of the pack there, little tails. So you can see that there quite clearly, and you can also see the strap on the respirator haversack is pulled down at the rear with the string passing through it to hold it high on the chest, and that's quite well illustrated here, obviously with nothing cluttering up the back. You can see obviously haversack here, you can see the water bottle down on the hip there. We're missing from either the hip or the back of the equipment the entrenching tool, and you notice that the helve is not attached next to the bayonet either. The 2-part entrenching tool, which had been issued alongside the 1908 pattern equipment, were introduced alongside it, had been taken out of army use in the interwar period and was not on issue in the 1930s. So it would be reintroduced. We've talked about this in other videos recently. The 2-part entrenching tool will be reintroduced into British Army service during the Second World War, after a brief foray with the sort of German-style short shovel entrenching tool, the 1939 pattern. But at this time period, the British Army did not issue an entrenching tool. It seems the Royal Navy carried on issuing it. Their 1908 pattern equipment, naval marked 1908 carriers for the 2-part entrenching tool exist after the Army had taken it out of service, so the Navy seemed to have stuck with it, but the Army removed it from service. So again, lightened the load somewhat there. We don't have the entrenching tool. Finally, we'll take a look at the right-hand side of the equipment here. We lift the arm out of the way again. We can see the water bottle carried down on the brace ends here in its carrier. A subtle difference here is the carrier. In the early 1920s, these were modified, I believe it was around 1921, to remove the press stud from the front and split the straps. The strap, a la 1937 pattern, now buttons together on the shoulder of the bottle with a snap there. Hopefully you can see a press stud on the shoulder there. So that's a modification which was carried out to existing carriers, and also it was specified for new production. So that the spigot was removed from the male part of the press stud and moved up onto the shoulder, so that you had a 2-piece strap that buckled over the side of the bottle. So by the 1930s, this is the most common to see, and it is the standard. It's what you should see. So a subtle difference there, just in the modification of the water bottle carrier. So there we are. That was the Mannequin of the Month for December 2020. The interwar years are somewhat neglected, and it's a topic I'll probably cover in more detail in the future. Put the uniform on, get some photographs and so forth, and look at the various bits and pieces here in a little bit more detail. As I say, some subtle changes there, enough to differentiate this from the latter part of the Great War, certainly, but still very similar as well in terms of the overall visuals. The helmet wasn't always worn. There are also photographs of men on exercise wearing the service dress cap. So that really almost takes you back to a sort of early Great War look, I guess you could say. But the cap is a slightly different shape. So in the interwar years, to a degree at least, the British Army had definitely gone back to, or had definitely stayed in a sort of steady state in terms of kit and equipment, at least to a degree. And it was only in the late 1930s that you really begin to see a change. And this is something that's been covered a little bit in a previous video looking at British infantrymen in Europe in the winter of 1939-40 and the winter of 1944-45, which shows that although wearing the new Webb equipment, many men went to France in 1939 wearing service dress, particularly regulars. So there was a gradual change through the late 1930s as rearmament kicked in, upgrades to equipment, personal equipment, and the Army's heavy equipment as well, of course, and the weaponry as well, as we've already discussed, which wrought its own change on the web equipment that the Army was using and so forth. So anyway, incremental changes, and as I say, a look at an interwar soldier on exercise, and a look at some of the small incremental changes which had taken place up to that point, which would accelerate as the Second World War loomed on the horizon. Hope you found it interesting looking through that. If you have, and you'd like to see more from the channel, please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've already subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the little notification button down below. If you'd like to support the channel, you can. There's Patreon and PayPal linked down below. And as already said, if you'd like to vote on the topic that's covered each month, the corporal tier over on Patreon allows you to vote on the mannequin which will be considered each month. So if that's something that might interest you, that's linked down below. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, and there'll be photographs of this posted up over there, then that's also linked down below. We've got Facebook, Instagram and Twitter all linked down there. If you'd like to make contact but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address down there as well. But that's everything for this video, so until next time, bye for now.